welcome back to my channel. My name is Jordan, and thank you so much for clicking on one of my bookish videos. Today, I am so excited because I am filming my top 10 books of 2025 video. I have read at this point, I think, close to 190 books this year. We still have a few days of 2025 left, but I am mainly finishing some rereads and starting a few advanced copies for 2026 releases, which I don't like to include in my yearly wrap-ups. So I feel pretty good about saying that these are my top 10 books. It has been such a good reading year this year, and it was very difficult for me to narrow down to this top 10, but all of these I love so much, and I'm so excited to talk to you about all of them. So if you want to see my top 10 books of 2025, then keep on watching. Okay, so I'm someone who takes reading wrap-ups and picking my top books of the year very seriously. It's one of my favorite things to do every single year. I will say that I think this is one of the hardest years for me. I had a good 20 books that could have been in my top 10, and I had to really spend the last month narrowing down and picking like my tippy top ones. These are all 5-star reads for me, 100%. A lot of these I read more than once. Honestly, I just feel very lucky because I know a lot of people went through book slumps this year or maybe didn't have the best reading year. As you will see, I read a lot of different genres, and so I feel like that very much helped me because if I was going through a slump with one specific genre, I kind of just moved on to the next and then found something that I really enjoyed and then went back to the genre later, and I feel like that really helped me out. I will stop blabbing and start out. I'm going to go in order of when I read the book, so starting from the beginning of 2025 to now. My first, I think, 5-star read of 2025 and one of my favorite books of the year is My Friends by Frederick Bachman. I read the arc of this at the beginning of 2025 and absolutely loved it. I am a huge Frederick Bachman fan. The Beartown series is one of my favorite series of all time, and honestly, this book is a close second for me to that series. I absolutely loved it. I reread it again in May when it released and loved it even more on my reread. This is a literary fiction book. It follows this group of teenagers, and it's told from the perspective of one of the friends when he's older. He's about 40 years old, and this teenage girl that he meets. And so he's kind of telling the story of his friend group and their adventures to her from his perspective now, later on. I thought it was so beautiful. I thought it was very classic Frederick Bachman writing. The stories and the adventures that this group of friends went on was so fun and heartwarming, and there's a lot of really great themes of love and friendship and loss and grief, but mainly how your friends, especially when you're younger, can really lift you up and give you a lot of wonderful memories and life, and I loved it. Okay, next we have another repeat author for me in my top 10, and that is Oathbound by Tracy Deonn. This is the third book in the Legendborn cycle series, and this is also one of my favorite series of all time, and I was so excited for the release of this third book in March, and I absolutely loved it. As you will see, this is a very big book. It's definitely the biggest in the series so far, and it does feel a bit different compared to the first two books because it's very heavy on world building and moving the plot along and a lot of character development and a character study for not just the three main characters but a few of the side characters who we get their point of views in this book, and I absolutely loved it. Anytime you give me a Tracy Deonn book with Bree and just following along with her as she kind of navigates her, early womanhood and figuring out her identity and her purpose and her role in the secret society, I eat it up. And I really enjoyed the love triangle in this one. I am normally team Cell, and I still am, but I will say the way that Tracy wrote Bree and Nick's adventures and storyline in this book, I really loved it. Next, if you have watched any of my videos this year, you know probably what is my favorite book of the year and has been throughout most of the year, and that is Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. I have read this book 3 times this year. I read the arc back in in March, and then I reread it in June before it released, and then I listened to the audiobook in the fall. Every time I read this book, I loved it more and more. This is marketed as toxic lesbian vampires, and that is exactly what it is. It is a very dark vampire fantasy world and book that follows three different females who all are turned into vampires against their will in three different time periods. So you have Sabine, who turns into a vampire, I think in like the 1800s, and then Lottie, who Sabine helps turn into a vampire in like the 1900s, I think, and then Alice, who turns into a vampire in the 2000s and is like a modern college student. I really like the different time periods, and I just love V. Schwab's writing in this book. It's very lyrical, similar to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I loved the themes of love, hunger, obsession, loss, grief, loneliness, vulnerability. I just thought it was absolutely fantastic and such a fun but devastating read. Next, we have another absolute favorite of mine, and that is Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I do love me a good TGR book, but I think that this could be a favorite of mine now, of hers, because this book absolutely blew me away. I also read this book twice this year and absolutely loved it both times. I physically read it when it came out, and then I reread it by listening to the audiobook in the fall, and the audiobook is absolutely outstanding. It is narrated by Julia Whalen, who's one of my favorite audiobook narrators. This is a historical fiction love story of sorts. It follows Joan. She is one of the first female astronauts in NASA's space shuttle program in the 1980s, and it's really just following Joan as she navigates being a woman in this very male-dominated scientific field while also figuring out her identity and her sexuality at a time where it was very difficult to be homosexual, and especially in such a high-profile government program like the space shuttle program. And it follows Joan as she falls in love with Vanessa, who is another one of the NASA astronauts. It is so heartbreaking. It is so beautifully written. The quotes in this book are some of my favorite of all time. I love Joan's relationship with her niece, who she really raises as her own child, and it was just so beautiful. And next is another huge favorite of mine, the one I would say romance book who made it in my top 10 this year, which is very interesting because I read a lot of romance and I loved a lot of romance books this year, but this is the clear standout for me, and that is One Golden Summer by Carly Fortune. I will be so honest, I did not expect to love this book as much as I did. I have enjoyed Carly Fortune's other books, most of them. This book, there is something in it that just made me absolutely obsessed with Charlie and Alice. I read this book also twice this year. I listened to the audiobook on the second time and absolutely loved it. This is set in Barry's Bay. It connects to Every Summer After, which is Carly Fortune's first book, and it follows Alice as she goes to Barry's Bay for a little vacation with her grandmother over the summer. Alice is kind of dealing with her photography career, feeling a bit burnt out and trying to figure out what she wants to do going forward. And at the cottage in Barry's Bay, she meets Charlie Florick, who is a resident at Barry's Bay, and the two of them form this really pure and intimate friendship very quickly and just slowly fall in love with each other over the summer, even though they both are at very different and hard places in their life. It is so good. It makes me so happy, even though I cried multiple times reading it, and I love this one. Next, we have a book that is a bit of a crazy one, but I absolutely loved it, and no shocker because it's by Miss Olivia Blake, and that is Girl Dinner. This book, I was hoping I was gonna like when I heard the concept of it, but I absolutely became obsessed with it when I read it. I think that this is one of the most unique book ideas and plots that I have ever read. Basically, it follows this sorority girl and a professor at her university. It's kind of just a dialogue and exploration of very white, able-bodied, wealthy, cisgender woman women and feminism and exploring a lot of recent trends like trad wives and the whole like clean girls and girl dinner. And it's so interesting. I will say, check the trigger warnings. This book does incorporate cannibalism, which is crazy to say, but it's really, really well done because cannibalism is basically a metaphor for this very type of perfect girl and the perfect world and success that she achieves in the sorority. It is so interesting. It is so well done. I highly, highly recommend it. Next, we have a book which honestly I think is my other contender for like top book of the year if I was putting this in a ranking order, and that is Chain Gang All Stars. I had heard about this book before, but my friend Courtney was really raving about it this year, and so I finally picked it up and it absolutely blew me away. Similar to Girl Dinner, this also has a very, very unique plot, which I loved. It basically is the adult, more devastating and horrific version of the Hunger Games. It is set in a dystopian United States, think in like 2035, which doesn't feel very far off. And it is exploring the mass incarceration and criminal justice system in the United States. And specifically, there are prisoners in the United States prison system that can decide to become part of these chain gangs, which basically is this like professional sport program where prisoners form groups and then fight to the death in arenas for the pleasure and viewing of the United States public. And it incorporates real facts and statistics about the United States mass incarceration system and is basically a critique of that system. It is so well done. It is heartbreaking. There's romance and just really beautiful relationships in this book, and I think it's a must read for every adult. Next, we have a book that I think is incredibly underrated and we need more people talking about it, and that is Woodworking by Emily St. James. This is a book about mainly two transgender women. So it's following Abigail, who is a teenager. She transitioned when she was a bit younger. And then Erica, who is, I think, like a 35, 40-year-old woman who has recently accepted that she is transgender and is beginning the process of figuring out how to come out and how to transition. It's set in a very rural, conservative town in South Dakota and is such a heartbreaking but important book to read. I really took my time getting through this book because it was very, very difficult to read at times. It's very dark, but I really loved the perspective of kind of accepting yourself and recognizing your gender identity and your sexuality from two very different woman point of views. And it was just such an interesting book to read. I feel like I really learned a lot about the transgender identity, and that I think was one of the author's main goals with this book. Yeah, it's definitely, I think it's such an important book to read. It was really beautiful. It made me so emotional, and I just really love these characters. Okay, next we have a book that is another top book for me, and that is I, Medusa by Ayana Gray. My friend Kate raved about this book, and as soon as I figured out it was a Greek mythology retelling, reimagining, I knew I had to read it. I am a huge Greek mythology geek, and this book absolutely did Medusa's character justice. I feel like we don't often get to see retellings about Medusa that are accurate to her myth and the stories surrounding her, but also humanize her and give her her power back, especially when she's such a prominent villain in Greek mythology. Ayana Gray's take on Medusa was so beautiful and emotional, and I absolutely was blown away by this story. It follows Medusa from when she's a young girl with her family, very isolated, but also curious and wanting to see the world around her, and how that kind of lures her into becoming Athena's Athena's acolyte and the different challenges that she goes through at Athena's temple while also being courted and pursued by Poseidon, and the age dynamics with that relationship. It does go through Medusa's sexual assault, so definitely check the trigger warnings for that. But I think the way that that topic was handled was very well done. And then it follows her as her and her sisters are turned into gorgons and monsters, and how she navigates the world as a monster after she is portrayed and perceived as a villain. It was so emotional. The last few chapters, like the last 50 pages, I just was constantly crying. I listened to the audiobook and absolutely loved the audiobook narrator, and I can definitely see myself rereading this soon. Okay, the last book to round up my top 10 is The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. This book is a very, very recent addition, but I have not been able to stop thinking about it, and I feel like it really deserves this spot. This apparently is like the biggest book of 2025, but for some reason, I had really not heard about it that much until my friend Yasmin read this, I think a few months ago, and really raved about it. And I recently picked it up. I listened to the audiobook on a whim, and I was just blown away by, again, a very unique plot. This book is told fully in letter form. So it's about this, I think, like 75, 80-year-old woman, Sybil. The entire book is letters that she has written to her loved ones, to friends, to people she's met throughout her life, and then letters from all those people back to her. You get this kind of fully woven story throughout time, learning who Sybil is, who her family is, what she cares about, and in the end, who she's actually writing to. It was such a beautiful story. The writing in this is so moving and emotional. The end of the book and like the reason for the book just had me crying in my car listening to the audiobook, and I can absolutely see why this is a top book. It's definitely a literary fiction book that I would recommend to a very wide range of people, which I appreciate, and it deserved a spot in my top 10. Okay, so that is it for my top 10 books of 2025. I can't believe that the year is almost over. It feels like it flew by, but somehow dragged on. And of course, I didn't make it through all of the books in my TBR, but that is quite okay. I am really happy with my top 10. I feel like it shows the very wide range of genres and books that I read, which I always appreciate. And I feel like it's going to be a really hard year to top. So I'm excited for my reading in 2026. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing about these books. Maybe you've read some of them. Maybe there's some that you can add to your TBR for the new year. And I would love it if you subscribe for more videos from me in 2026. I'm super excited, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.